The Admiral smirked as he displayed her file on the screen. Red redactions covered half the document. The perfect opportunity to make an example. "Rather convenient gaps in your record, Commander," he announced to the room of officers. "What was your call sign again? Or did you never actually earn one?" The room fell silent. She stood motionless, her calm demeanor only fueling his mockery. Then a young lieutenant stood, recognition dawning on his face as he stared at her wrist insignia. "Sir, that's legend. She saved your brother's life at Khyber Pass." From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you value stories of quiet courage and unsung heroes, consider subscribing for more military narratives that honor those who serve without seeking recognition. The morning sunlight streamed through the reinforced windows of the Naval Intelligence Training Center's Strategic Operations Room, catching dust motes that danced in the air like suspended stars. Screens lined the walls, displaying satellite imagery, tactical overlays, and maritime intelligence reports that bathed the space in a cool blue glow. The room hummed with the quiet energy of 24 naval officers preparing for the day's assessment exercises. Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison stood at parade rest, positioned slightly away from the cluster of more boisterous officers. 5 years at this posting had taught her the value of strategic positioning, close enough to observe everything, far enough to avoid unwanted attention. Her hazel eyes scanned the room methodically, missing nothing while revealing less. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, not a strand out of place. Her uniform, unlike many others in the room, bore minimal decorations despite her rank. "Let's begin the strategic assessment," Admiral Preston Westfield announced, his voice filling the room without effort. At 52, Westfield cut an imposing figure with silver hair, cropped militarily short, and a chest adorned with commendations that caught the light whenever he moved. His face seemed perpetually set in stern lines, as if he'd forgotten how to express anything but disapproval. The Admiral had commanded the training center for just over a year, quickly establishing a reputation for exacting standards and public criticism. "Commander Ryerson, your team's analysis on the South China Sea scenario," he directed, pointing to a senior officer in the front row. Commander Ryerson stepped forward confidently, activating the main tactical display with a practiced gesture. "Thank you, Admiral. Our analysis indicates that the optimal approach follows standard doctrine for contested waters. We recommend a 3-tier defensive perimeter with electronic countermeasures positioned here and here." He indicated points on the digital map with quick taps. For the next 40 minutes, team leaders presented their tactical assessments of the training scenario, a complex operation in contested waters with multiple opposing forces and shifting political constraints. Each presentation followed predictable patterns of conventional naval doctrine, earning perfunctory nods from Westfield. When Selene's turn came, she moved to the central display without flourish. Her voice was measured and clear, carrying just far enough to reach every ear without straining. "Our analysis identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in the standard approach," she began, highlighting sections of the tactical map with precise gestures. "By redirecting our surveillance assets here and here, we create an intelligence advantage while reducing exposure of our primary vessels." Several senior officers nodded appreciatively as she outlined an alternative approach that minimized personnel risk while maximizing operational effectiveness. Her solution elegantly balanced competing priorities in ways that conventional doctrine couldn't accommodate. Furthermore, by establishing these data collection points, she continued, marking additional locations, we can maintain persistent intelligence gathering even if enemy forces shift unexpectedly. Westfield's expression darkened slightly. "Your approach disregards Protocol 5-7 for naval engagements in disputed territories," he interrupted. "With respect, Admiral, Protocol 5-7 assumes conventional force disposition. The scenario parameters indicate asymmetric threats that the protocol doesn't address." Selene's response was immediate, but not defensive, her tone remaining respectful. Before Westfield could respond, Lieutenant Commander Abernathy spoke up from the back of the room. "She's right, sir. The Morrison approach gives us flexibility the standard doctrine lacks. I ran a similar simulation last month that supports her conclusion." The Morrison approach. The phrase hung in the air, drawing Westfield's attention more sharply to the quiet officer who just outthought everyone in the room. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around his mouth, suggesting displeasure. "Lieutenant Everett," Westfield redirected, Pull up the team assignment matrix for the next phase. Let's see who's qualified for specialized tactical planning." The young technical officer complied, bringing up personnel files on the main screen. As he scrolled through, Celine's file briefly appeared, showing unusual gaps and redacted sections that stood out starkly against the comprehensive records of her peers. Westfield raised a hand, stopping the scroll. "Go back 2 files." His eyes narrowed as he studied Celine's record more closely. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, there seem to be some inconsistencies in your service record." "Interesting." The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Officers exchanged glances, some curious, others uncomfortable. Celine remained perfectly composed, neither defensive nor apologetic. "The exercise parameters, Admiral?" she prompted quietly, attempting to redirect focus to the training mission. Westfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll address that shortly. I think everyone would benefit from some clarity on your qualifications for this assessment." From the corner of the room, Lieutenant Ezra Rivera studied Selene with growing intensity. At 28, Rivera was the newest addition to the intelligence team, having transferred from field operations just 3 months earlier. Something about Morrison tugged at his memory. A story, perhaps, or a briefing from his deployment. He unconsciously touched a small scar on his forearm, a souvenir from his time overseas. "Let's continue with a personnel credential review before proceeding," Westfield announced, his gaze fixed on Celine with barely disguised anticipation. "Full transparency ensures we all understand the experience basis for strategic recommendations." As officers shuffled into position for the impromptu review, Selena caught Rivera's eye. The younger officer looked away quickly, but not before she registered the spark of recognition forming in his expression. 30 minutes later, the operations room had been reconfigured. Officers sat in rows facing the main screen, where Westfield now displayed Selene's service record with redactions highlighted in bright red. The normal tactical displays had been minimized, with all attention now focused on the personnel file that should have remained confidential. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison transferred to us 5 years ago with an impressive but curiously vague record," he began, pacing slowly before the screen. "Special operations experience, yet no specific units listed. Overseas deployments, but no location specified." Celine stood at parade rest, her expression neutral, despite becoming the center of unwanted attention. "In my experience," Westfield continued, "these kinds of gaps often suggest embellishment or administrative favors." He looked directly at Celine. "Perhaps you could clarify for us all?" "My record contains standard security clearance redactions, Admiral," she responded evenly. "Standard? There's nothing standard about these omissions." Westfield's tone grew increasingly mocking. "Half your service history is missing. It suggests either fabrication or someone protecting you from proper scrutiny." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Some officers looked down at their tablets. Others watched with growing discomfort as Westfield's review began to feel more like a public humiliation. "Sir," Celine said quietly, "I respectfully suggest we continue with the training exercise." "I'm conducting a training exercise right now, Lieutenant Commander, on the importance of integrity in our ranks." Westfield enlarged a section showing transfer from naval special warfare. "You expect us to believe you were part of special operations with no supporting documentation?" Lieutenant Rivera shifted in his seat, his attention increasingly focused on a small scar visible at Selene's temple as she adjusted her stance. Something was coming together in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. He stared at the date of her transfer, June 2019. The timing aligned with something significant, a story that had circulated among deployed personnel that summer. "Admiral, with respect," Celine began, "did you even serve in a combat zone, Morrison? Or did you draft reports from the comfort of an office?" Westfield's voice grew louder, his enjoyment of the moment obvious. The tension in the room became palpable. Several senior officers exchanged concerned glances. Commander Abernathy looked ready to intervene, but seemed unsure how to do so without making the situation worse. "Your file lists no call sign, Lieutenant Commander. Strange for someone claiming special operations experience." Westfield's smile was predatory. "Perhaps you'd care to share it with us, assuming you actually earned one." Celine remained silent, her composure unwavering, though something in her eyes hardened. "I'm waiting for an answer, Morrison. What was your call sign in the field?" Or shall we assume it never existed? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Every eye in the room was now fixed on Celine, waiting for her response. When it finally came, her voice was quiet, but carried clearly to every corner of the room. Legend. The single word hung in the air like a suspended breath. Legend? Westfield scoffed, breaking the silence. Rather grandiose for someone with so little to show for it. Lieutenant Rivera stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sir, may I speak?" Westfield looked annoyed, but nodded curtly. "Sir, Legend was the code name for the SEAL team leader who executed the Khyber Pass extraction in 2019. Rivera's voice gained strength as he continued, years of military discipline temporarily forgotten in the importance of the moment. That operation rescued 16 servicemen trapped behind enemy lines after their convoy was ambushed. Other officers began to murmur, some turning to look at Cellini with new eyes. Among those rescued was Captain Michael Westfield, sir." Rivera looked directly at the Admiral. "Your brother." The color drained from Westfield's face as the implications registered. His brother had survived an impossible situation, thanks to a shadow operative whose identity was classified above even his clearance level, and that operative had been standing quietly in his command for 5 years. "That's impossible," Westfield managed, but his voice lacked conviction. "The mission details were classified to protect the extraction method and the team's identities," Rivera continued. "But everyone who served in that region knows what happened. How one operator led an impossible rescue when headquarters had written those men off as lost." The room erupted in hushed conversations. A senior officer whispered to his colleague, "I thought Legend was a man. That's what all the stories said." "That was intentional," Rivera explained, having overheard. "Part of operational security." Selina remained perfectly still, neither confirming nor denying, but the truth was written in Westfield's shocked expression. "Lieutenant Rivera, this is highly inappropriate." Westfield attempted to regain control, but his authority had evaporated like morning mist under the harsh sun of revelation. "Your brother showed me the modified dog tag he carries, sir," Rivera interrupted respectfully but firmly. "The one with Legend stamped on it. He told me he and every man rescued that day had them made as a reminder of the debt they could never repay." Westfield stood frozen, remembering his brother's words at every family gathering. "I'm only here because someone went beyond the call." Michael had never elaborated, claiming the details were classified, but he touched that custom dog tag whenever he mentioned it. Without a word, Cellini collected her materials and walked calmly toward the door. Before exiting, she paused and turned slightly. "The exercise parameters still need finalization, Admiral. The teams are waiting." Her voice carried no resentment, no triumph, only professional focus on the mission at hand. As she left, every officer in the room, including Rivera, stood at attention in a spontaneous show of respect. 2 hours later, Admiral Westfield sat alone in his office, staring at a framed photo on his desk. It showed him and his brother at a family wedding last year, both in uniform, both smiling. Michael had returned from deployment just 6 months before that photo, the deployment he should never have survived. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Vice Admiral Lysandra Harlow strode into the room without ceremony. At 58, she commanded the Norfolk Naval Base with a reputation for ruthless competence and absolute fairness. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform bearing the evidence of decades of distinguished service. "Preston, I understand there was an incident during training today." Her tone made it clear this was not a question. Westfield struggled to meet her gaze. "I made a grave error in judgment." "That's putting it mildly." Harlow placed a tablet on his desk, its screen displaying a classified file with the security clearance temporarily elevated. "This is the unredacted file on Operation Khyber Shield. I suggest you read it." As Westfield read, his expression shifted from shock to awe. The file detailed how then-Lieutenant Morrison had volunteered for what was considered a suicide mission after conventional extraction was deemed impossible. How she infiltrated hostile territory alone, located the survivors, and led them through treacherous mountain passages while engaging multiple enemy combatants. The report included medical documentation of Morrison's injuries, a bullet wound to her shoulder, shrapnel damage to her face, and severe environmental exposure. Despite these, She had refused evacuation until all 16 rescuees were secured. The file included a personal commendation from the Joint Chiefs, citing unprecedented courage and tactical brilliance, resulting in 0 friendly casualties during an operation with projected 98% fatality rate. The after-action report detailed Morrison's decision-making under extreme duress, noting her improvised extraction route through mountain passes previously considered impassable. "She never used this," Westfield whispered, looking up from the tablet. "All these years in my command, and she never once mentioned saving Michael's life." "That's who she is, Preston." Harlow's voice softened slightly. "The best operators never tell war stories. They don't need to." "What do I do now?" The question contained genuine remorse. "That's up to you, but I'd start with remembering what real service looks like." Harlow moved toward the door, and perhaps reconsidering what strength actually is. After Harlow departed, Westfield remained at his desk, the unredacted file still open before him. The details painted a picture so at odds with his assumptions that he struggled to reconcile them. Morrison had operated alone for 48 hours in hostile territory after her extraction team was compromised. She'd located the 16 stranded servicemen, treated their wounded, and devised an escape route through terrain so treacherous that pursuing forces wouldn't risk following. The most sobering detail came near the report's end. Subject refused immediate evacuation despite multiple gunshot wounds, insisting all rescued personnel be transported first. When questioned about this decision, subject stated only that leadership means ensuring others return before you do. Westfield pulled out his personal phone and stared at his brother's contact information for a long moment before dialing. "Michael, it's Preston. I need to ask you something about your rescue." His brother's voice grew immediately guarded. "You know I can't discuss the classified details." "I know who Legend is," Westfield said quietly. A long silence followed. Then, "How?" "She's been under my command for 5 years, Lieutenant Commander Celine Morrison." Another silence, this one heavy with implication. "And you're just now figuring this out?" "I made a mistake, Michael, a significant one." His brother's laugh held no humor. "Let me guess. You saw the gaps in her record and assumed the worst. Probably made a public spectacle of questioning her qualifications." Westfield's silence was answer enough. "Jesus, Preston!" Michael's disappointment was palpable even through the phone. "That woman walked through hell to bring us home. She took a bullet pulling Ramirez from the wreckage. When our water ran out, she gave us hers. When Martinez couldn't walk, she carried him. I didn't know." "That's the point, isn't it? You didn't know, so you assumed, just like headquarters didn't know, so they wrote us off as acceptable losses." The truth of it stung, but Westfield didn't interrupt. "We were 16 men, trapped in hostile territory with dwindling ammunition and 3 critically wounded. HQ deemed extraction too high risk until she volunteered. One person, Preston, one, and she got every single one of us out alive. I need to make this right," Westfield said finally. "You can't," Michael replied bluntly. "But you can learn from it, starting with what actual courage looks like." After ending the call, Westfield sat motionless, confronting uncomfortable truths about his leadership and his character. He'd built a career on demanding respect rather than earning it, on hierarchy rather than service, and in the process, he'd publicly humiliated the one person who embodied everything he claimed to value. The following morning, Celine arrived at her office precisely at 600 as she did every day. Her routine never varied. Physical training at 500, shower and uniform change by 0545, at her desk reviewing overnight intelligence reports by 0600. The consistency provided a framework that had helped her transition from field operations to intelligence work. She had just begun analyzing surveillance data from the South Pacific when her computer chimed with a priority message. Admiral Westfield had scheduled a private meeting for 0800. No agenda was specified. Celine acknowledged the notice without reaction. Yesterday's incident would have consequences, but she had long ago learned to focus solely on what she could control. She returned to her analysis, identifying patterns in vessel movements that suggested increased smuggling activity near the Philippines. At precisely 0758, she arrived at the Admiral's office. His aide, a young lieutenant who had witnessed yesterday's confrontation, avoided eye contact as he announced her arrival. Send her in. Westfield's voice carried through the door. Celine entered and stood at attention before his desk. Lieutenant Commander Morrison reporting as ordered, sir. Westfield looked up from his computer, and Celine immediately noted the change in his demeanor. The arrogance had diminished, replaced by something more measured, more thoughtful. At ease, Commander. Please sit down. She complied, sitting ramrod straight in the offered chair. Westfield seemed to struggle with where to begin. I've reviewed your unredacted service record, he said finally. I assumed as much, sir. The official report doesn't begin to capture what happened at Khyber Pass, does it? Celine met his gaze steadily. Reports rarely do, sir. My brother called last night, after I called him. Westfield's fingers tapped nervously on his desk. He said you refused the commendation they tried to give you. It wasn't necessary. 16 men thought differently. They all wrote letters recommending you for the Navy Cross. The mission was its own reward, Admiral. Westfield studied her with new eyes, seeing for the first time what he'd been missing. The quiet competence, the understated efficiency, the complete lack of self-promotion, all qualities he'd interpreted as mediocrity rather than exceptional strength of character. Why did you transfer to intelligence after Khyber? He asked. With your record, you could have written your own ticket. Special Operations Command, officer training, diplomatic security. Anything would have been yours for the asking. Celine considered her answer carefully. I'd seen enough combat, sir. Intelligence work allows me to prevent crises rather than respond to them. And the redactions in your file? Standard protocol for certain operations. The gaps protect both the missions and the people involved. Westfield nodded slowly. I owe you an apology, Commander. A significant one. That's not necessary, sir. It is. He met her eyes directly. I've submitted a formal reprimand to my own service record for conduct unbecoming an officer. What happened yesterday won't happen again. To you or anyone under my command. Celine absorbed this without visible reaction. Is that all, Admiral? Her response, professional, focused on the mission rather than personal vindication, only underscored how profoundly he had misjudged her. One more thing, Westfield said, opening his desk drawer. Michael asked me to give you this. He says you refused it before. He placed a small box on the desk between them. Celine made no move to take it. He had it made after the extraction, Westfield continued. All 16 of them did. They carry them as a reminder. Reluctantly, Celine opened the box. Inside lay a dog tag with legend stamped in the center, along with the date of the Khyber operation. Thank you, sir. Please tell your brother I appreciate the gesture. You won't keep it? Celine closed the box and slid it back across the desk. The mission was its own reward, sir. As she stood to leave, Westfield found himself standing as well, not from protocol, but from a newfound respect. Lieutenant Commander, he said as she reached the door, the joint exercise next month. I'd like you to lead the planning team. Celine nodded once. If that's where I'm needed, sir. The simplicity of her response highlighted everything he'd failed to understand about her from the beginning. For Celine Morrison, service wasn't about recognition or advancement or display. It was about being where she was needed, doing what was required, regardless of who received credit. Over the next week, the atmosphere at the training center shifted subtly. Westfield's leadership style became less confrontational, more focused on developing his officers' strengths rather than exposing their weaknesses. He never mentioned the incident publicly, but word spread as it always did in military circles. For her part, Celine continued exactly as before, neither acknowledging her newly revealed identity nor allowing it to change her approach to her duties. She worked methodically, mentored junior officers, and provided analysis that consistently proved accurate. Lieutenant Rivera became a frequent visitor to her office, initially drawn by curiosity about the legend, but ultimately staying for her tactical insights. He proved an apt student, combining his field experience with her analytical approach to develop a more comprehensive understanding of intelligence operations. The key isn't just collecting data, she explained during one session, but recognizing which patterns matter and which are distractions. Rivera nodded eagerly. My brother said something similar about you, legend I mean, during the extraction. He said you filtered out all the noise and focused only on what would get them home. Celine's expression remained neutral. Your brother was part of the 16? Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant James Rivera. He was the communications officer. He said when your team was compromised, you destroyed all classified equipment, then came back for them alone when everyone else wrote them off. He performed admirably under extreme duress, Celine said simply. You should be proud. I am, ma'am. Rivera hesitated, clearly wanting to ask more, but sensing her reluctance to discuss the operation. He's stationed at Coronado now, training new SEAL candidates. He still tells them the story, though he never knew your name until I told him. The story serves its purpose without names, Lieutenant. Celine redirected his attention to the tactical display. Now, about these surveillance patterns in the South China Sea. 3 weeks after the revelation, Admiral Westfield stood before a new class of intelligence officers, Rivera among them. The training center's largest classroom was filled to capacity, fresh faces eager to make their mark in naval intelligence. Naval intelligence operates in shadows, Westfield began, his usual opening taking on new meaning after recent events. Your greatest victories will often go unacknowledged. Your contributions may never be fully known, and that requires a particular kind of strength. He paced slowly across the front of the room, his eyes occasionally drifting to the back, where Celine stood quietly observing. Many of you have heard stories about legendary operators, ghost-like figures who accomplish the impossible. You imagine them as larger than life, as somehow different from ordinary sailors and officers. Westfield paused, gathering his thoughts. The truth is both simpler and more profound. The greatest strength often resides in those who never feel the need to prove it. The most effective operators are often those you'd pass without noticing. Remember that when you seek to judge someone's value by appearances alone. His gaze met Celine's briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. She nodded slightly, then slipped out of the room unnoticed by the class, exactly as she preferred. Back in her office, Celine returned to her work, the quiet satisfaction of service its own reward. On her desk sat a small framed photo, the only personal item in the otherwise austere space. It showed a team of 6 operators in desert camouflage, faces obscured by tactical gear and distance. Her team from before Khyber, before everything changed. She touched the frame briefly, then turned to her computer, where satellite imagery awaited her analysis. There were patterns to identify, threats to mitigate, sailors and soldiers whose lives might depend on her seeing what others missed. The legend would continue to circulate in hushed conversations and training exercises, growing more elaborate with each retelling. But the woman behind it would continue as she always had, moving quietly through the world, making a difference without demanding recognition. That, after all, was the true measure of strength. 1 month later, Celine led the joint exercise planning team with the same quiet efficiency that characterized all her work. What had changed was how others responded to her leadership. The whispers had faded, replaced by attentive focus whenever she spoke. Her recommendations were no longer questioned, but implemented with careful precision. In the main operations room, she guided her team through complex scenario planning, highlighting potential vulnerabilities in conventional approaches and suggesting alternative tactics. Lieutenant Rivera had proven especially adept at integrating her analytical methods with practical field applications. The critical gap in coverage occurs here, she explained, indicating a section of the digital map displayed on the main screen. By repositioning our surveillance assets, we maintain continuous intelligence gathering without compromising our defensive posture. The assembled officers nodded in agreement, their respect evident in their focused attention. Admiral Westfield observed from the back of the room, his expression thoughtful as he watched the officer he had once tried to humiliate, now commanding the respect of everyone present. When the briefing concluded, officers departed with clear assignments and renewed confidence in the exercise parameters. Westfield approached as Celine gathered her materials. "Excellent work, Commander," he said, his tone genuine. "The Joint Chiefs representative was impressed with your approach." "Thank you, sir. The team worked well together." "They follow your lead, Morrison. That's not something that can be mandated by rank." Celine acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Will you be attending the field component next week?" "I will." Westfield hesitated, then added, "As will Captain Michael Westfield. He's been assigned as an observer from Special Operations Command." The information landed without visible effect. "I look forward to meeting him officially," Celine replied evenly. "He feels the same." Westfield studied her for a moment. "He never knew your name, you know. None of them did. You were just the operator who got us out until Rivera recognized you that day." The anonymity was intentional, Admiral. It protects the mission and the people involved, and allows you to continue serving without being defined by a single operation. Celine met his gaze. Something like that. After Westfield departed, Celine remained in the operations room, reviewing the exercise parameters once more. The knowledge that she would soon face one of the men she had rescued created a complex mix of emotions she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Michael Westfield had been unconscious for most of the extraction, suffering from a severe concussion and shrapnel wounds. He likely remembered little of her beyond a voice in the darkness urging him to hold on. That was for the best. Legends served their purpose precisely because they remained abstract, undefined by the messy reality of human limitations and fear. The operator who had extracted 16 men from certain death existed in stories and whispers. Lieutenant Commander Morrison existed in logistics reports and intelligence briefings. The space between those identities was where she had found her peace. The following Tuesday, the joint exercise began at a training facility 50 miles inland from Norfolk. The scenario involved coordinating naval intelligence with ground operations in a simulated hostage rescue. Multiple agencies participated, from naval special warfare to intelligence units to marine extraction teams. Celine oversaw the intelligence component from a command center overlooking the training grounds. Her team monitored surveillance feeds, analyzed incoming data, and provided real-time assessments to the operators in the field. Midway through the morning session, Captain Michael Westfield entered the command center with several other observers. Taller than his brother, but with the same silver-streaked hair, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-stress environments. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, a souvenir from the Khyber ambush. His eyes found Celine immediately, recognition lighting his features. She nodded professionally and returned her attention to the surveillance feeds, maintaining the fiction that they were strangers meeting for the first time in an official capacity. The exercise proceeded smoothly. Selena's intelligence team identified the simulated hostage location with remarkable accuracy, enabling the extraction team to complete their mission with minimal simulated casualties. When the scenario concluded, evaluators declared it one of the most successful joint exercises they had observed. As the teams gathered for debriefing, Captain Westfield made his way to Selena's position. He extended his hand formally. "Commander Morrison, excellent work. Your intelligence assessments gave our operators exactly what they needed." "Thank you, Captain. Your team executed flawlessly." The professional exchange masked the weight of their unspoken history. Around them, other officers and evaluators discussed the exercise results, oblivious to the significance of this first official meeting between rescuer and rescued. "I understand you'll be joining us for the evaluation dinner this evening," Michael said, keeping his tone casual. "As required, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Some requirements are worth fulfilling, Commander." The evaluation dinner was held at a private dining facility on the training grounds. Senior officers and evaluators gathered to discuss the exercise results and plan improvements for future iterations. Celine arrived precisely on time, her dress uniform immaculate as always. She had just taken a seat at one of the side tables when Admiral Westfield approached. "Commander, would you join the head table? The Joint Chiefs representative requested your presence for the discussion." Selena complied without comment, though she preferred the anonymity of the side tables. At the head table sat Captain Michael Westfield, 2 Marine Corps colonels, and Vice Admiral Harlow. "Commander Morrison," Harlow greeted her, "your intelligence team's performance today was exemplary. The identification of the secondary location before the hostage transfer would have saved lives in a real operation." "Thank you, Admiral. The team worked well together." "Don't deflect credit when it's due, Commander," Michael Westfield interjected. "Your analytical framework made the difference. I've seen similar scenarios where the transfer was missed entirely." The dinner proceeded with detailed discussion of the exercise results. Celine contributed when directly addressed, but otherwise maintained her characteristic reserve. As coffee was served, the conversation shifted to broader topics of intelligence integration with field operations. "The gap between intelligence collection and operational application remains our greatest vulnerability," Colonel Barrett observed. "Too often, critical information doesn't reach operators in time to be useful." "A matter of trust as much as logistics," Michael replied. Operators need to trust that intelligence is accurate and actionable. Trust is earned in both directions, Celine said quietly. All eyes turned to her, surprised by her voluntary contribution. Intelligence officers need field experience to understand operational constraints. Operators need analytical training to understand intelligence limitations. You speak from experience, I understand, Admiral Harlow said. Your background bridges both worlds. Celine nodded slightly but offered no elaboration. The restraint only enhanced the respect evident in the expressions around the table. As the dinner concluded, officers dispersed into smaller groups for continued discussion. Celine prepared to depart when Captain Westfield approached her. Commander, might I have a word in private? She followed him to a quiet corner of the room, maintaining a professional distance. I've wanted to thank you properly for 6 years, he said, his voice low. My brother told me you refused the dog tag. It wasn't necessary, Captain. To you, perhaps. To us, the 16, it was essential. He held her gaze steadily. What you did defied every probability assessment, every tactical doctrine. You had no obligation to volunteer for what was classified as a non-recoverable scenario. Every service member deserves the certainty that we don't leave our people behind, Celine replied simply. Is that why you never used your story, never leveraged what you did for advancement or recognition? The mission was its own reward. Michael smiled slightly. You know, we all imagined what legend might be like. Some thought you must be 7 feet tall. Others assumed you were some grizzled veteran with decades of special operations experience. No one imagined… A woman? Selena raised an eyebrow. Someone so dedicated to the work rather than the recognition, he corrected. In a culture that often promotes the loudest voice rather than the most effective operator, you're a revelation. I'm just doing my job, Captain. As you did at Khyber. He reached into his pocket. I know you refused this before, and you'll probably refuse it again. But I want you to have it anyway. He handed her a small box, identical to the one his brother had offered. Inside lay the dog tag with legend stamped in the center. 16 of us carry these, he continued. Not because we need to remember, that would be impossible to forget, but because it reminds us of what real courage looks like. Not flashy or attention-seeking, but quiet and determined and unflinching when everything seems lost. Selene held the tag briefly, running her thumb over the engraved letters. For the first time, something in her composed expression softened. I'll keep it this time, she said quietly. Thank you. As they returned to the main group, Admiral Preston Westfield watched their interaction with newfound understanding. The transformation in his leadership approach over the past month had not gone unnoticed by his subordinates. The public criticism had been replaced by thoughtful mentorship. The demand for deference replaced by genuine respect for expertise regardless of rank or background. The following morning, as officers gathered for the final exercise debriefing, a palpable sense of accomplishment permeated the room. Teams had functioned cohesively, intelligence had proven accurate, and extraction protocols had been executed flawlessly. Admiral Westfield opened the session with uncharacteristic humility. Yesterday's exercise demonstrated what we can accomplish when we integrate all aspects of our capabilities. No single component, intelligence, operations, logistics, succeeds in isolation. Our strength lies in recognizing the value each brings to the mission. His eyes met Selene's briefly before continuing. Leadership isn't about the loudest voice or the highest rank. It's about enabling others to succeed, about recognizing strength in all its forms. When the debriefing concluded, officers dispersed to their respective commands. Selene gathered her materials efficiently, preparing to return to Norfolk with her team. Commander, Admiral Westfield approached, a word before you leave. They stepped into an adjacent office, away from the departing officers. Naval Intelligence Command has requested you for a special task force, he said without preamble. Counterterrorism analysis with direct input to field operations. Given your unique background, you're ideally suited for the role. Is that your recommendation, sir? It is, though I'd prefer to keep you on my staff. Westfield handed her a folder containing the official request. You've transformed how my intelligence teams operate, Morrison. But this role would allow you to have broader impact. Selene reviewed the documents thoughtfully. I'll consider it, Admiral. The choice is yours. You've earned the right to determine your own path. He extended his hand. Whatever you decide, It's been an honor serving with you, Commander." As they shook hands, something fundamental shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. Westfield had glimpsed the person behind the quiet efficiency, and she had acknowledged his capacity for growth. 3 days later, Celine sat in her office reviewing the task force proposal. The position offered greater responsibility, broader influence, and the opportunity to better integrate intelligence with operations, potentially saving lives by closing the gaps she had observed throughout her career. On her desk sat the dog tag Michael Westfield had given her, a tangible reminder of what had once been merely a legend. She had kept it not out of pride, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important work happened in shadows, unrecognized but essential. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Rivera entered with the latest intelligence reports. "The South China Sea analysis, Commander, and congratulations on the task force appointment. Word travels fast around here." "I haven't accepted yet, Lieutenant." "But you will," he said with surprising confidence. "It's where you're needed most." The simplicity of his assessment reflected her own thinking. Celine nodded slightly, appreciating his understanding of what motivated her decisions. "My brother asked me to give you a message," Rivera continued. "He said the 16 are having their annual reunion next month. They'd be honored if you would attend. Tell him I'll consider it." After Rivera departed, Celine finalized her acceptance of the task force position. The legend would continue in whispered stories and training examples, but Lieutenant Commander Morrison would continue the work that mattered most, quietly, effectively, without seeking recognition. That, after all, was the true measure of strength, not in power displayed, but in service rendered without need for applause. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose quiet strength spoke volumes louder than any boast? The true heroes are often those whose greatest accomplishments remain untold, their power evident not in what they claim, but in what they achieve without fanfare. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you found meaning in this story of unrecognized strength, consider subscribing for more narratives that honor those who serve with quiet dignity.